You're listening to The Scrimmage with Daniel Hargrove and Justin Domashevitz.
Since there's still no sports, it's a historical athlete, and your Ole Penn Real Estate Athlete of the Week is Matthew Jensen. And Matthew was the starting quarterback of the Montesano Bulldogs for 2 years. Did he start as a sophomore?
I actually don't remember 2011.
I know that I'm pretty sure he started as a junior. But as a senior, they went on that magical run after the stadium burns down, beating some amazing teams in the playoffs. Crazy season, and ending up winning the state championship with his dad, Terry Jensen, the head coach, in one of the coolest moments we've had covering high school football.
The team of realtors at Ole Penn Real Estate wish you and your family good health during this stay home, stay safe time. Their team has health and safety measures in place to protect you and everyone involved in the process. If you're thinking about selling your home, now is a great time. There are more buyers than available homes. Many homes are still receiving multiple offers and are selling for above asking price. Ole Penn Real Estate will help you put the most money possible in your pocket in less time without the hassle. Visit sellmyharborhome.com to get your home market ready. The Ole Penn team is ready to work for you. It's interesting because, that season, at some point, in some way, that story is going to be told. Whether somebody writes a book about it, or somebody makes a movie about it, or somebody makes a series of podcasts about it, copyright pending. This was a bonkers, to steal a word from Daniel, this was a bonkers season. The Bulldogs there was high expectations going in, but they lost a couple games early in the season, including one to the Hoquiam Grizzlies, in which they were torched by Nolan Hoynes, who in that game broke the Hoquiam record for rushing yards in a game and was unstoppable.
Which is kind of amazing that he did it against that team.
Because they had tons of fast guys, really good players on it.
Because they're a really good team.
Yeah.
Usually you see rushing records broken against, teams.
Yes. So then almost immediately after Nolan breaks that record, torches the Bulldogs lose that game, their grandstands burned down. So they ended up having to play some of their home games at fields in neighboring towns. They did end up being able to play a homecoming game on their home field at Roddle, but there were no grandstands. They kind of put in some temporary bleachers. They had a scissor lift for the PA announcer. I covered that game as a newspaper reporter. It was pouring outside. There was no cover and no place for me to go. So I ended up with pages soaked with a little bit of pencil writing, and the best I could do was make notes about what touchdowns were scored. But fighting through all that incredible amount of adversity, I remember towards the end of that 2012 season, Daniel, you and I were talking about it when we were going, man, from the beginning of the season to now, Matthew Jensen has gotten really good. And by the end of the season, we were starting to say, you know what? That Hoquiam team's really good. I'd like to see these teams play against each other in the playoffs, because overall, Hoquiam had more talent. I'm going to go ahead and just say it. I'm sorry, Monty Bulldog fans, if you disagree with me on that. The 2012 Hoquiam team was more talented overall. But when we got down the stretch and we were looking at it, we're going, okay, when you start getting into postseason games, you have to be able to pass the ball.
Exactly.
Because these teams like Hoquiam and like a lot of Monty teams that just run over everybody all season, not really having to worry much about the passing game, sometimes they get into the playoffs, and when they start facing teams that can match up with them, they can't run the ball as effectively anymore, and They have to mix in the pass. So I remember distinctly during the season going, Matthew Jensen is turning into something special, and he could take the Bulldogs and elevate them to something great.
I think we had that conversation with each other a lot.
We did. Yeah.
And we were just giddy over the thought of maybe seeing those two teams play again, because we thought it would be different.
Yeah.
We didn't know who the winner would be. I think between the two of us, I probably would have picked Hoquiam and you probably would have picked Monty, but it would have been a pick'em game in my opinion.
Yeah.
It would have been really close.
I think especially with just the coaching and adjustment ability of Terry Jensen, Monty's head coach, but also, perhaps equally as importantly, Brian Hollitz, who was their defensive coordinator and really famous for his packets of scouting reports on every team's offense, that his players would go into those games as equipped as possible, knowing what percentage, if any team lined up in any formation, here's the percentage that they run left, right, pass, blah, blah, whatever. They knew everything if they studied the packet going into it.
And I would love to play for a coach like that.
Yeah, and they dialed up these strategies that were just incredible.
Yeah, and one of the most famous ones was in that playoff run against Kings, who had just eked out a victory over that Hoquiam Grizzlies team at Olympic Stadium, and it brought up a showdown between the Bulldogs and the Kings Knights, and that's one of the most memorable games I can think of. And not only was the defense amazing, but again, you saw that when things got down into the nitty-gritty, Monty had so much trust, and Terry Jensen had so much trust in his son to call plays that put the game in his hands.
And knowing that they were going to have to be able to pass the ball when they got into the playoffs, I think when they got into that state title game against Royal, and they were underdogs, like people thought like Royal was a heavy favorite. In fact, when I pulled up articles today to try to go back and look up what the stats were in that game, it was underdog Montesano Bulldogs take down top-ranked Royal or whatever it was. Like Royal was a heavy favorite. And the Bulldogs went into that game unintimidated because they knew they could match up. They knew they had a game plan that could work. And passing the ball was a really important element of that. In that state championship game, which Daniel, to me, we were on the radio broadcast together. You were on color commentary with Ian Cope on play-by-play. I was on the field with a microphone and just kind of you guys would throw it to me every once in a while, and I'd say something occasionally insightful and mostly stupid. But that game was probably the most memorable thing I've ever covered in my radio and newspaper career, because I got to be on the field watching a great performance overall by the team. But Matthew Jensen, man, he didn't miss a throw in that game. He was on point. It was not all short throws. He was throwing bombs down the sidelines. There was one play distinctly that I remember, and I think it was going to Ben Ohashi, and it was down the left sideline, and he threw a bomb, and the spot that I was standing in on the sideline, if it hadn't been an absolutely perfect throw that Ohashi caught on the run, it would have hit me. Like, that's the line that I had on it. But just watching Jensen just be so on point in that game, 2 touchdown passes, but 15 of 20 passing for 268 yards against one of the best teams in the state, if not the best team in the state at the 1A level, was really incredible.
Yeah, Elliott Mendenhall and Tucker Babo each rushed for 2 scores in that game as well. First title since 1994, including a 42-yard touchdown pass to Richard Smith on the final play of the first half, which was... I mean, were you right next to that one too? Because that's one of the most memorable plays for
I was
me.
really close to that one. I think I was standing around the 10-yard line or so. But that was a crazy play because when you watch it, like they set it up like a Hail Mary, and everybody was in the front of the end zone. And then they just sort of, am I remembering this right? They just had Richard Smith kind of leak out to the back. And going into this game, I had no idea who Richard Smith was. But he made not only that play, but he made catches also at other crucial points in the game. And it almost looked like it could have been a Hail Mary that was an accident that went too far and Smith caught it in the back of the end zone. And then come to find out later, no, that's the way they drew that play up, was for him to sneak in the back and make everybody think that the Hail Mary was going to one spot and then it went somewhere else. It's really incredible.
Exactly. And I forgot about this, but they were down 21-10 early in the second quarter of that game. So Royal kind of jumped out on top of them. And then that touchdown pass ended up making it 22-21 at the half, which was huge. And then they just kind of rolled from there, winning by 15 points. But that was a magical season, as you mentioned. And I think as we've seen so many talented football teams from around here, from Montesano and from Hoquiam, since we've really been covering high school sports, because the Elma run of the late 90s, early 2000s was before us. And those were some great teams. But Monty and Hoquiam have kind of taken turns dominating football. And to be honest, mostly Monty. You know, it's more like you find an age group and you're like, oh, is this the year that Hoquiam's going to come up? And 2012 was one of those seasons where you're like, oh, this is Hoquiam's year. But it ended up at the end of the year, it was Monty that advanced in the playoffs, advanced farther, made it to the Tacoma Dome, and then won the state title. And I think a lot of it was because they had the ability to not be one-dimensional on offense. And I think we've started to see a shift a little bit for some teams now that throwing's becoming more of a thing, but you really have to have the ability to do both when you're talking about getting to the Final Four of playoff football in this state.
Well, and in addition to just having the second element of being able to throw the ball, I've seen many quarterbacks who early in the football season, when it's a little drier out, can throw the ball, and then when it starts to get wet and cold, teams have a really hard time passing the ball, and that seemed to rarely affect Matthew. A couple other key points on Matthew that are really memorable to me. Post-game in the state championship, it's an absolute madhouse. And in case you haven't been there, when it used to be at the Dome, they would play several games in one day. So you'd have championship game after championship game after championship game. So there's a mad scramble to get both players and teams and reporters and everybody off the field while simultaneously getting the next teams onto the field to get ready for their game. So it turns the field into like just a crazy place. And all the reporters trying to crowd around and get comments from Matthew. And I remember before any of that could happen, when the game was over, instantly Matthew made a beeline for his dad, and it was one of the most touching and emotional moments I've experienced, where if you don't know these people, like, it's easy just to see them as people. Like, it's easy just to see them as like someone who's out there entertaining you, and it's easy to lose track of like the people element of it. But in that moment, when I watched them embrace and just cry together in that moment of joy, it was so incredibly powerful to think about. Like, he's been coaching his son since he's tiny. This is the culmination of years, over a decade probably, of work for them to get here. And they're enjoying this moment together. And it was like, it just sends chills up your spine when that happens. And then Matthew, who was a really fun player to talk to, at least in part because he was pretty unfiltered. And sometimes you wouldn't exactly know what was going to come out of his mouth at any given moment. He's a really funny guy. And I remember that during his post-game interview, one of the reporters had asked him, well, okay, you guys won the state championship. What are you going to do? What's next for you? Well, how are you going to celebrate? And he's like, well, I think we got basketball practice tomorrow. In his mind, he had already rolled over to basketball practice.
Yeah, and some good baseball players on that team, too.
Yeah. Because
that was a team that went pretty deep in the baseball playoffs.
They finished second in state. Yeah, they lost in the state championship game because that was also Lane Bruner's senior year, who went on to be a minor league pitcher and pitch at Washington State University, highly recruited and also drafted in the MLB draft.
Yeah, and Jensen was like their number 2 pitcher.
He was their number 2 pitcher, yeah.
Yeah,
so he was really good.
Really good at baseball.
I think if you asked a lot of the guys in that class, even though they won the state championship their senior year in football, they'd tell you that was a baseball class. They were all in on baseball.
And yet they won the state championship in football. Matthew Jensen, the quarterback of that team and the quarterback of one of the most magical seasons.
And the quarterback of your hearts.
I think we had Hutton Napier where we talked about that game and that team a little bit too, because he was a freshman. And when we were asking for mailbag questions once, Hutton was like, what's the best season in the last decade? And we were like, come on, Hutton, you already know the answer to it. But yeah, that was probably the best season. And the fact that it started out 1-2, were they 1-2 or 1 or 2-2 after that?
I have to go back and check, but both of their losses were early.
Yeah,
I remember that.
And yeah, they just went on this magical run. And Matthew Jensen, the quarterback of that team, and our Ole Penn Real Estate Historical Athlete of the Week. Again, thank you so much to Ole Penn Real Estate for that sponsorship.